Welcome to Danny Houlihan's Irish Experience podcast. Join Danny on a journey through the historical island of Ireland, its people and the wild Atlantic Way, which is Ireland's last frontier. Experience the music and the culture that makes up the longest coastal driving route in the world. Now, please welcome your host, Danny Houlihan.
Cuireann fáilte go dtí slíon bharna Shannana. Welcome everyone to the Shannon Estuary Way and Danny Houlihan's Irish Experience Show. This time from the famous Shannon Estuary Way in County Clare, Ireland. And as usual, if you're walking, jogging, meditating, or indeed on the Shannon boating, please take care. Yes, we're in County Clare, Ireland for this episode, and the home place of my grandparents, the Grogan family from Gower, where my grandmother, Christina, walked and played as a child, and indeed knocked out a few tunes on her famous concertina. In this episode, I travelled out in the company of a friend and learned expert. We crossed the Shannon by the famous Killimer Tarber car ferry. This ferry bridges the Shannon Estuary, and if you're travelling from Clare to Kerry or vice versa, it is a must, as on the fine day one can see the dolphins and the scenic views of the famous Shannon Estuary Way. Arriving in Killimer, the day was wet, and the mist was mystically hovering over the grassy banks of the Shannon Estuary Way. We took a left and went inland through the historical landscape of Killimer. Our quest was to visit the birthplace of the famous Saint Senan of Scattery. And if you have tuned in to my series along the way, I dealt with Saint Senan in another podcast. Saint Senan was born in a place called MoyLougha in the year of 488. The saint died on the 1st of March in the year 560. The famous saint of the Shannon, Saint Senan of Scattery, as I said, was a native of Clare, County Clare, in the townland of MoyLougha. Saint Senan was prophetically announced, and during the time of St. Patrick, the saint was recommended by Patrick and other holy men who encouraged people and pilgrims to visit the saint on his holy island of Inishcohig or Scattery Island. Saint Senan's family, according to historians, were from the farming community, and a very holy family indeed. Thus the connection with the land and its history. The saint's parents were Ercan and Congela, and he had a sibling who was the patron of Clare, known as Saint Aimee. North of the lake bore the name Saint Senan's Lake, where a flagstone existed in MoyLougha, which according to sources was the birthplace of the famous Shannon saint. From the many stories and history of the saint, it has been related that Saint Senan's father had another farm to the west of the ferry in the parish of Carrigaholt, and thus a journey was undertaken to tend to animals in a place called MoyLougha. One story related that one particular day, Saint Senan's father sent Senan to a farm in another location to bring cattle home. However, when he arrived at the place on the estuary called the Black Weir, the tide was in. So Senan waited, but then in front of him the waters receded, and Saint Senan was able to bring the cattle home to MoyLougha. The island on the Shannon Estuary associated with the saint is called Scattery Island. Scattery Island, or Inishcohig, is located on the Shannon Estuary in County Clare, just off the Kerry coastline. The Irish name for the island, Inishcohig, is named after a sea serpent, which according to historians of County Clare, the saint banished from the island in the distant past. The legend related that the monster occupied and terrorised the island, but when the saint landed on the island, he spoke to the Cathach, which then vacated the area. Of the early life of Saint Senan, we know a small bit, that he was placed under Abbot Cassadon, under whom Senan studied. Later he completed his education at the Knoll in Kilmanagh, County Kilkenny. The saint's missionary life, he is associated with a church in Enniscorthy in 510 or 512. The area today is known as Temple Shannon. Cornwall, Saint Senan's Cove. In Brittany, France, at Plouzaine, the Church of Senan. He is also believed to have visited Menevia, Rome and Tours, and later returned to Ireland around 520, at that stage an elderly man. Another church associated with the saint was a church in Inishcarra in County Cork, Inishluana at Deer Island, Inishmore, and Mutton Island. The death of Saint Senan was on the 8th of March 544, and the famous Shannon Estuary saint was buried in a place called Temple, or Temple Senan. His grave is a special one, as miracles have been associated with the stones from his grave, which, in local lore, give protection from various diseases and indeed drowning. Another local story about the famous saint was that of a local chieftain who feared the saint and plotted the saint's fate or downfall. He engaged the powers of a local Celtic druid who was brought to the Holy Island. However, on the approach to Scattery Island, a wave rose up and drowned the chieftain and the druid, halting their evil plot. Another associated story of the saint was a tradition which related that Saint Senan's mission forbade women on the island. There was no women there, but females could land on the shoreline. It has been related that Saint Canair or Conora, whose convent was located in West Ballylongford on the Kerry side, called to see the saint to be anointed before she died, which he allowed her on the shoreline. Of course, he was very fair. Where she stayed and died there. Clare was buried at the high water mark with a slab, still known to this day. Another story associated with the saint was that of Cligonoir, the Golden Bell. Tradition relates that Saint Senan one day, in the company of two other saints, were worshipping at a place called Kilsenan, 2 miles northeast of Kilkee. During the course of a conversation in relation to our Lord, the Lord was called upon to choose who was his chosen one. The heavens opened, and a golden bell descended on Saint Senan's head, indicating the Lord's choice was Saint Senan. The monastic area of Saint Senan were baronies in MoyLougha and Clonderlaw in Thomond, barony of Conelog, County Limerick, and a part of North Kerry from the river field to the Atlantic. These were Senan's areas. The area is natural countryside, and overlooking the Shannon Estuary, it is a scenic place. As we continued on our journey, we met at the crossroads. I have to say the area is well signposted, so if you follow me here to MoyLougha, you will not get lost. Clare County Council has gone to great expense to make sure the visitor will see its unique history. We took a left at the cycle signs and proceeded a mile or so to a T-junction. We followed a sign which led us to a turn in the road and to another sign. There was an elevated bank. The sign stated, MoyLougha, MoyLougha, Plain by the Lake, the birthplace of Saint Senan in 488 AD, and his sister Aimee, patron saint of Killimer Parish. The church ruins and Saint Senan's altar are located in this area. On arriving at the graveyard, the view was that of small sod-covered tombs, unique to this area, I have to say, constructed of small flagstones. Again, like other graveyards we have seen during my research, taken at some point from the ruins of an old church or churchyard, which is overlooking the tombs and grave slabs. The church is in a ruinous condition, with its wall foundations open to the elements. One can see the large blocks of old cut stone, which were laid back in time to mark the old church. Green moss covers the gable of the ruin. This is indeed a historic place. One can also see that there were other buildings attached to the church at some time, but over time they have been reused in the tombs. They are laid out in a neat fashion in the graveyard. Saint Senan's well, and indeed the location of his birth, is just located down the field and is well identified by a signpost. Walking around this ancient ruin, one can feel the atmosphere, the history, the culture associated with Saint Senan of Scattery. Walking around the ancient graveyard, one can feel the ancient history that was once in this place, and indeed his family and sister Saint Aimee. The graveyard has many markers to families locally: Mulqueen, O'Brien, Bloomfield, Frawley, Duggan, amongst others. May they rest in peace. This particular area is well worth a visit on the Shannon Estuary Way, a place in County Clare which is steeped in history and culture. Again, I must leave you all now, but be assured I'll be back in the next few weeks with another episode from the Shannon Estuary Way. So for myself and all on Slian Verna Shonana, on the Shannon Estuary Way, I say slán.
Thanks for listening to our show. Through its people, its heritage, and its rugged coastline, this is truly Danny Houlihan's Irish experience. Bye for now.